Hello, I am pleased and joyful to be here with Nicholas from Earnworthy. First question is, can you tell us a bit about your background and experience?
Absolutely. Hey, Jason, great to be here. And I've been doing marketing since 2009. I started my own agency in 2015, and I specialize in growth marketing. And right now, I exclusively work with other agencies. So I consult other agencies. From time to time, I work with non-agencies, but that's really my bread and butter. But my background is all about helping anyone who's looking to get more conversions out of their website or their landing pages. So I do a lot of technical marketing, like conversion optimization, marketing automation, marketing operations, A/B testing, all that technical mumbo jumbo. But at the end of the day, what I really want to do, and what I'm hopefully going to be able to do on this episode, is just educate and share some helpful tips on how people can leverage growth marketing to take their businesses to the next level.
That's great. And I'll add, people who get value from this clip can also book you for one-on-one sessions on Mentorcam as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I love utilizing Mentorcam. I love being able to work one on one with founders and other marketers and business pros and help solve their growth problems. So we could always dig into anything that I cover in more detail and we could apply it to a specific business through a Mentorcam session.
Wonderful. And real quick, I'm just curious, what inspired you to specialize in this field of growth marketing?
Yeah, when I first started, I had no idea what growth marketing is. I remember going through all these different phases of marketing, saying, I'm just going to be an online marketer. And then that evolved into being an inbound marketer because that was very popular when I was starting my own agency back in like 2015. And that was largely led by HubSpot, which was pushing the idea of inbound marketing. And then over time, that sort of evolved because I realized that I didn't want to just specialize in the inbound aspect of marketing. I didn't want to specialize in the creative side. I didn't want to specialize just in demand gen. There's so many different subcategories when you break down marketing. But one thing that I realized was that with all of the client engagements that I had worked with and everyone I had worked with, I realized that it all came down to growing a business or helping an agency grow the client's business. And so growth was really something that I latched onto. And I discovered this whole world of growth marketing. And a lot of people have like a negative connotation about growth marketing because they typically are introduced to the term growth hacking. And I always like to be clear that, in my opinion, and this again is it's just my personal opinion, growth hacking and growth marketing are two different things. Growth hacking is very quick and dirty, and it's like let's just try to hack your way to the top. But growth marketing is much more sustainable. It's a slower approach, but it still leverages data and it tries to get the business objectives that business really needs and tries to help that business scale over time. So yeah, now that's what I do exclusively is growth marketing.
I think that's great. And I totally agree with you, right? I think we look at growth hacks as like these quick little testing, like how
Yeah.
do I quickly sort of tip the scales? Whereas you look at growth marketing as a long term strategy,
Yep.
right? And it actually applies to, you can get product insights from growth marketing and
Exactly.
understand your customers better. And okay, great. Totally agree. So now let's kind of dive into the meat a little bit. You are a landing page expert. So let me ask you, like, what are the key elements that make up a successful landing page?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite questions, and it's something that we could literally spend an entire day on. I've done all day workshops on landing page optimization, so I won't bore you with the long version. But over the years, I've realized, just having worked on thousands of landing pages at this point, that there are really 7 questions that a landing page needs to answer. So I've created this entire framework, and I go through this on Mentorcam calls, and I do this all the time whenever I'm giving landing page feedback. And I can go through them quickly. So the big idea is that with a landing page, you need to answer the questions that the visitor has. Like that's the overall idea. When someone visits a landing page or even your website, they're going to have some questions. Some are subconscious questions, some are conscious questions. For instance, the first question is, do I quickly understand the big idea? So I call that the clarity question. Like in an instant, we need to be able to tell the visitor, this is what this page is about. This is what's being offered. Is it clear? The second question would be, can it specifically help me? And I call that the relevance question because if a page is not relevant to that person who's visiting, then it shouldn't even exist really, right? Because we only care about what's in it for me, what's in it for us. And then the third question is the affinity question. That one is basically, do I like it? Do I get a good sense from this page? And that's another subconscious split-second decision that we make. You can just see right in an instant if someone is going to like that page or not. And that has a lot to do with the branding and the design. The fourth question is, has it helped others? I call this the influence question. And this is all about showcasing social proof and results. And the fifth question is, do I trust it? That's the trust question, obviously. And that dives into security and trust factors and trust seals and all that good stuff. And the sixth question, I call this the advantage question. It's, is there something special about it? This one's really important, and it's easy to overlook this, but you need to always try to pull out what is unique about your product or service and highlight that on your landing page. Because if you don't do that, people are comparing you against so many different options, and you're just going to be a commodity. So you have to showcase that unique advantage. And finally, the seventh question, I call this the action question, because if we do all this right and we don't help people take action, we haven't really accomplished much. So the final question is the action question, which is, can I easily take action now? So that, in a nutshell, are the 7 questions that, in my opinion, every landing page should try to answer.
Okay. It's great to have all those 7. Obviously people don't spend a lot of time when they initially land on a landing page.
Right. Yeah.
So have you been given any thoughts to how important the landing page design is for conversion rates?
This is another very common question I get asked, where it's, should I focus more on the design or the copy? Right? Those are usually the two things that people are comparing. In my opinion, they're both important, but in my opinion, the copy, the actual messaging on the page, is more important. And I think if we were all presented with a page where it was just literally black text on a white background, but it had a compelling offer, it had a great call to action, a great headline that really captivated us, it felt relevant, we would probably take action. We would take that next step. But if we were to reverse that, and let's say we had the most beautiful page that's designed by world-class designers, but the copy was robotic or artificial, and there was really no offer and it didn't really resonate with us, we wouldn't know what to do, or we wouldn't care what to do. So in my opinion, while design is very important, the copy is more important. And I always recommend starting with the copy first before going into the design.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why, as you were speaking that, I was being reminded of the success of Craigslist, which is really,
Right.
it's all
Perfect
about the
example.
copy,
Yeah.
and it had massive success and growth in a
Yeah,
very
imagine if they
unique
changed it.
way.
What would happen? Now it's become such iconic bad design that works.
Exactly. These have been great. I'm just one last question there. Is there any process that you do when you're trying to optimize an existing landing page?
Yeah, so at my agency, we actually have like a 20 question survey that we walk through with our clients. Some clients have worked with us for so long that they'll literally just send us their answers to the 20 questions. So I won't go through all that, but those questions are actually based on that 7 question framework that I just covered, because the idea is we need to get all the right information to be able to answer those 7 questions for the visitor. So obviously, one of the first things we want to dig into during our landing page optimization process is understanding who the audience is that's going to be visiting the page, because that's going to help us answer the clarity question and the relevance question, especially because we need to make it relevant for them. And then we're going to dig into some other questions that'll help us answer things like, what specific behavior do we want people to take on this page? This is a very common mistake I see made, where people do a great job with the copy and the messaging, but the actual offer on the page is very weak. And a perfect example of this is, you've probably seen pages where the call to action is something like submit, or it's learn more, or it's subscribe to our newsletter, and it's this very weak, vague offer. And that really is an offer. Some people may say, well, that's a call to action. Is that an offer? But behind the scenes, that's an offer, right? You're offering either more information, or some chance to connect, or some chance to get more follow up with someone. But if it's not specific and it doesn't showcase the value of what's in it for that visitor, they're probably not going to take action. So that's another thing we walk through during that process, is we figure out what are the behaviors we want to encourage, and then how do we tie the right offer to it. And then we go into the messaging component, which is like a whole big process of how do we craft a compelling headline and a subheadline, call to actions, micro copy. And then at the end, that's really where we're doing design and then some usability testing. We're building out the framework or the skeleton of the page. We're doing the mobile optimization. Then we're doing all the analytics and tracking setup. So all that happens towards the end.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and the A/B testing and
Yep.
all that. Wow, great answer. It sounds like you put a lot of effort into getting these pages optimized correctly. Let's. You mentioned calls to action. I'm
Mhm.
curious, like, what role should the CTA play on a landing page?
Yeah, so I think it's first important to differentiate between a CTA and an offer, because I use the terms. I like to use the term offer because I think that's the more important element to really dig into, because the offer is, in my opinion, the most important thing on a landing page. What is that page offering? The CTA is sort of the vehicle through which you can obtain the offer. So the CTA is usually going to be either a button, a form. If it's an e-commerce site, it's the opportunity to add something to the cart and then go through that checkout process. A lot of the pages I work with are in the lead gen category. So it's usually going to be a button that then directs people to a form, and then they're going to put in their information and get something, whether it's a free downloadable or a consultation or some type of quiz that they're going to get the results from. And so when it comes to the CTA, you always want to keep in mind that it's all about the visitor. And so you have to put something in that CTA that's going to be enticing to them. So if we're talking about writing CTA copy, I like to think of it, if we're trying to write button copy, for instance, this would be considered micro copy on a landing page. You have to put thought into it. You don't want it to just say submit or learn more or get now or request. You want it to try to answer that request or that burning desire that the visitor has. So one little trick that I like to use is you want it to continue the sentence of I want to, right? So I want to get my free consultation. So in that case, maybe the perfect CTA button copy would be get my free consultation,
Hmm.
because it talks about that end result that the visitor wants to achieve.
Yep. And any comments, quick 2 cents on many CTAs, one CTA, or I mean, if you're focusing on offers, you typically want to have one offer. Does that mean you only want
Right.
to have one CTA?
Yeah, so you definitely want to have one offer. Now, you can sometimes have secondary offers and secondary CTAs. So a common example of that is if you're in the any type of service industry, it's not uncommon to have a phone number CTA and have a form fill CTA, and then have maybe even a live chat or a messenger type CTA, and you have the trifecta of all of them working towards one goal, which is to get in contact with that lead or that prospect. So that in that case, even though they seem like they're three different CTAs, they're really focused on the same offer. So I think that's perfectly fine to have like a primary CTA. But even in that situation, you can still optimize towards one of them. So we all the time we're trying to figure out, okay, should we optimize towards a phone call or a form submission or a live chat? And you can tweak and you can pull certain levers to try to get more form submissions and less phone calls and vice versa. But as a general rule, yes, you want to have one main CTA. You don't want to have, hey, learn more and check out my blog and buy now and read about us and follow us on social and join our newsletter. That's going to be very confusing.
Yes, because it really is all about optimization of the
Mhm.
conversion, right? And
Absolutely.
so, how do you know the landing page is successful as we're sort of jumping into conversions?
Yeah, so this is where you really have to dive into the numbers, and you have to know upfront what is it that is what how do you define success? Right? Is it more form submissions, or is it higher quality leads, or is it more sales of a certain product, or is it a higher total order value if we're talking about e-commerce? And so there's a whole bunch of different numbers we could cover, and again, this could be a whole thing just on like what metrics to measure. But some that I really like to look at are obviously the conversion rate. And there are different types of conversion rates at different points of the funnel. Like you could have a multi step landing page funnel and you have a conversion rate for each step, or you could have that overall conversion rate. So you have to track all of that. And then there's the cost per action or the cost per lead, right? And then you have the customer acquisition cost, because this is another situation that happens all the time where you can optimize a page to convert really well. You can get that conversion rate way, way, way up. But then you look at the actual value of a customer, right? The customer lifetime value, or how much it actually costs to acquire that customer when you look at it in a blended sense, like through the entire funnel. And it might not be the right customer for you, right? It might not be the highest value customer, or you might be losing money even though they're converting on the landing page. Maybe you're spending 10 times more on the acquisition side of things if you're running paid ads. So you really do have to look at the entire funnel, and you have to understand the conversion rate, the cost per action, the customer acquisition cost, the customer lifetime value. And then even after you acquire the customer, you have to have some metric to measure the qualitative sense of whether a customer is happy or not. And so a common metric for this is net promoter score, which is a very good indicator of just if they like it, are they going to refer you to their friends? So those are some of the metrics that I would consider looking at.
Yes, great. Agree 100%. And tapping into, like, I'm sure many of the audience wants to know, like, how important is the headline on a
Mm.
landing page?
The headline's very important. And going back to the 7 questions, because everything is based around answering those 7 questions, the headline is what answers the clarity question. So the clarity question is that split-second decision that you have to answer for the visitor, where they're going to look at that page and decide, is it for me? Is it not? And what is this? Am I in the right place? You have to do that quickly. And most people don't scroll. That's probably the biggest learning that I had when I was getting started, was just how I was putting so much effort below the fold in a landing page. And then you realize, especially when people are on mobile devices, they're making that decision above the fold in most cases, meaning they're not scrolling. So that headline has to pull them in. And I always like to pair the headline with a nice, compelling sub headline that's going to build on the headline. So think of the headline as pulling people in, getting them interested, making sure they understand they're in the right place. And then the sub headline, or the subheader, whatever we want to call it, is going to build on that and be a little more specific.
Great. Yeah, that actually leads me to my next question here. You talked about sort of heat maps and analytics. How do you use heat maps and analytics to optimize landing pages?
So I definitely recommend using the combination of both quantitative and qualitative data. And just to clarify what that is for anyone who's not familiar with those terms, the quantitative data, that's the numbers. That's going to be like the stuff you'd get from Google Analytics. And then the qualitative stuff, this is not so much the number quantifiable stuff, but it's the stuff like heat maps, or more importantly, session recording data, where you can actually see how someone is moving around the page. And in my opinion, you need to have both, right? The quantitative stuff is going to tell you what's happening. These are the hard numbers. This is what we need to improve. This is where there's a bottleneck. But to really understand why it's happening, you have to look at the qualitative data. And so my number one tool, I like to use a free tool called Microsoft Clarity. It's relatively new. A lot of people don't really know about it, but think of it as the qualitative counterpart to Google Analytics. So Microsoft happened to build it rather than Google, which is interesting. But it's a really powerful tool. It's free. And I love using the session recordings, because you can see how people are navigating from page to page, what they're clicking on, what they're getting stuck on. You can also look at click maps and heat maps. And in my opinion, I feel like heat maps are kind of overused and overplayed. Like, I don't get as much value out of a heat map as I do from just watching 5 minutes worth of session recording data and seeing how people are moving around the page.
Totally agree again. I've used Heap in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, they're great.
Hotjar.
Yep.
So definitely agree. I think we all know that people spend most of their time at the top of the page,
Yep.
right? But we want to really know what they're doing once they leave the top of the page.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk more about CTAs and pop-ups. What are some of the best practices for creating effective CTAs and pop-ups?
Yeah. So I guess we'll cover pop-ups. So with pop-ups, they can be very annoying. And whenever I mention pop-ups to a client, usually the reaction is, I hate those things. I don't want to put that on my site. It's just going to annoy people. But there's a reason why you see them on so many sites. They work. And there are certainly bad use cases of pop-ups. Like, a bad use case would be if it pops up too quickly, or it pops up too many times, or it pops up with the same information that I can see on the underlying page. Instead, what you should try to do with a pop-up is create some type of secondary offer that's going to pop up at a delay. And a good way to determine exactly when it should pop up is look in Google Analytics, or whatever analytics tool you're using, at what the average time on page or time on site is, and then use the 50% mark. So let's say that you have an average time on page of a minute, right? So maybe the pop-up should pop up in 30 seconds. So that way it's 50% of the average time on page. Now, that's not a hard rule, but that's just a general starting point. And then you can figure out if I need to increase it or decrease it. And then when it does pop up, try to use an offer that complements whatever was on the underlying page, but is like a secondary offer. So a good example would be, if you're selling insurance, the main page might be to get a quote, but then the pop-up could be some type of downloadable resource, checklist, the 10 things I need to know before I choose an insurance policy or whatever. So it helps the visitor get to that same goal of getting the right policy, but it does it through a different vehicle, different mechanism, where in this case, the pop-up is offering a PDF or some type of downloadable, and the page under it is offering a quote.
Yes. Great answers. Any tools that you use to create your pop-ups?
So we build a lot of landing pages in a platform called Unbounce, very popular landing page platform that's been around since 2009. They actually have pop-ups built into the platform, so we use those most often. If I needed to use pop-ups outside of an Unbounce environment, I like ConvertFlow. I think they're doing some really cool stuff over there, especially with e-commerce. And then a lot of the email platforms these days have their own pop-ups that are built in that you can then deploy. If you're in the WordPress ecosystem, a lot of sites are built on Elementor these days, and Elementor has some really powerful pop-ups that a lot of people don't really use the full power of that if you're in the WordPress ecosystem. But I would say most of the pop-ups that we build are built in Unbounce.
Okay, great tip. And let's talk about audiences and personas. How do you tailor your landing page to specifically target audiences? I'm sure it goes back to what you mentioned in the opening statement, your sort of top 7 questions, maybe on clarity. But I'm just curious, how do you tailor your landing pages towards these audiences?
Yeah, it really comes down to understanding the audience, and this is again a whole nother thing that we could spend a whole day on, just doing audience research, trying to figure out exactly who it is that we want to present this offer to, right? Because that's what we're doing as marketers. We're presenting an offer. We're trying to help someone overcome some type of challenge. We're trying to take them from a before state to an after state, and so you really have to get into the psychology of what is that before state, what are those problems, and then what does that after state look like, and how is our offer going to be the bridge that's going to get them there. In a nutshell, like that's what we do as growth marketers. And that this is something that I see so many people skip over. They just go right into the design or right into the copy because they think they know their audience, but they really don't. So what I would recommend doing is just talking to people in your target audience. And if you haven't launched yet, just talk to your potential customers, right? You got to get that feedback. And there's so many frameworks out there, and there's so many mentors on Mentorcam that can help you create your target audience or your persona or your customer avatar, whatever you want to call it. But you have to start with that. And then from there, you can work out all the additional steps, like what is the messaging, what is the offer. But it all starts from understanding who that target audience is.
Yes. And once you know your target audience, obviously you want to build the right value proposition. And do you have any sort of tips and tricks to creating a strong value prop?
Yeah, so I have a whole nother framework for this. Again, it's a pretty robust one. I call it the Hammer Offer Framework. But basically, you have to. I'll just go through them real quick. There's a few specific tips that I like to include in a value proposition or in an offer. Number one, you need to highlight the differences. What are you doing that's different? You need to address specific outcomes. Like, what are the specific things that your product or service is doing that can help someone achieve that before to after transition. Number 3 is you need to minimize risk. This is really important, especially with e-commerce. That's why we see so many free returns, free shipping, money back guarantee. You want to reduce the risk as much as possible. Number 4, you want to make things easy to understand. We want to reduce complexity, reduce cognitive load, reduce friction, make things simple. Don't use buzzwords. And then the next one is we want to encourage immediate action. So your value proposition is great, but if it's not combined with some type of encouragement or sense of urgency or sense of scarcity, as long as it's authentic, I'm not a fan of doing artificial scarcity, artificial urgency. That goes back to that whole growth hacking thing, which I'm against. Like I see it all the time where it's like it's an ebook and there's only 10 copies left. Like, come on, it's an ebook. You could have unlimited copies if you wanted. So you want to have some type of encouragement of immediate action, but you want to do it in an authentic way. And then finally, the last one is you want to require minimal effort to obtain whatever it is. So this is why I'm an advocate of using multi-step funnels to try to get people into that process little by little, so that you don't have this form that has 20 questions on it. You break it up, because that's going to get people to ease into that process, and it'll make it easier for them.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. I could definitely probably spend 10 interviews with you and I'm still going to get all the information. But trying to get to the conclusion here, like you're so knowledgeable. I'm curious, like, how do you stay up to date with all these latest trends and best practices? Things are changing so quickly. People are using, ChatGPT now.
Yeah.
Like, how do you stay on top of the latest trends?
I'm glad you mentioned ChatGPT. I love it. I think marketers who are not using it need to use it, not to artificially replace what they were going to say, but just to ask questions. Like you can literally go into ChatGPT and you could say, pretend that you're a marketing consultant, help me work through this problem. And it'll spit out some amazing ideas. So I use it for inspiration and just for ideas and just to sort of talk to different types of experts that you might not have access to. So I think ChatGPT is a fantastic tool these days. And in addition to that, something that's helped me personally stay up on things is I actually started a newsletter on the topic of growth marketing. And this forces me to constantly be looking at and bookmarking news articles and tools and tips and tricks so that every week I have to review everything and I send out my newsletter every week. Sometimes I miss a week because things are pretty busy, but I try my best to get it out there every week. So, starting some type of blog, newsletter, social media content where you are posting the content, it's going to force you or encourage you to just look at more content and learn. And then the final thing I would recommend, there's so many blogs out there and podcasts. We could talk about that all day, but I really like going back to the basics and reading books because I think with books, you're going to get more isolated content that the author really put a lot of thought into. So one of my favorite books is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And if you want to learn more about like writing compelling headlines and that type of thing, it's an amazing book. And then This Is Marketing by Seth Godin. That's another book I recommend all the time.
Great. And where can people go to find your newsletter?
Yeah, you can go to earnworthy.com/weekly. It's just like this, earnworthy.com/weekly. I could share a link. But yeah, it's called Growth Marketing Weekly.
Great. And are there other places for people to get in touch with you? Obviously, they can book you with one-on-one sessions on Mentorcam, but where else can people meet you?
Yeah, you could check me out on social media. Most of the platforms, my handle is Nicholas the Marketer, and that's Nicholas with an H, Nicholas the Marketer, or you could just go to earnworthy.com.
Great. And final question, I'm curious, like in talking about this research, where do you go to, like, we can learn a lot from books and we can learn a lot from ChatGPT, but when you really want to have a direct conversation with someone, is that part of your process? And who do you go to for that?
Yeah, and that's one thing I love about Mentorcam. I love being able to connect with other marketers and other business owners and hearing what problems they're working on and shooting ideas back and forth. So I think that's an invaluable thing that we all need to do. But in terms of just collaborating with people, another thing that I really recommend is joining Facebook groups. That's probably the last thing that's good about Facebook, because I know we all have our different opinions on Facebook. It's really the last reason why I'm on Facebook anymore is for groups. There's some really good discussions going on there. Or if you're not on Facebook, there's a lot of Slack communities that are just as good. But it's essential to always be bouncing ideas off of each other and joining a community, at least one. And thankfully, there's a platform like Mentorcam where you can do that and you can jump in and talk to people. So absolutely.
Okay, great. Any sort of final words of wisdom?
Don't get overwhelmed. I know, we covered so much. We got pretty technical for some of it. I would say at the end of the day, for anyone who's either in marketing or you're in a marketing role or you're trying to improve the marketing for your product or service or for your clients, just go back to the basics, focus on those fundamental elements. Remember, a lot of what we do is psychology, and it's just trying to help people. And that's another reason why I really like Seth Godin's book, This Is Marketing, because it reminds us that we're really just trying to help people here. We're not trying to manipulate people artificially. We're not trying to hack our way to the top. We're trying to help people solve problems. And if you can do that and you deliver value first, then usually it's going to work out in your favor.
Wonderful. This was Nicholas from Earnworthy. Really appreciate having you here to chat about growth marketing and landing pages. Thank
My
you for your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you, Jason.